Hey everyone, Karl Bainbridge here on INC Live. Sorry for the delay once again, my Sunday was very busy. All likelihood is that all of these post-fight recaps will be taking place on the Monday from now on. I just need some more time on my hands, but I am going to persevere. I am still going to keep continuing to do these recaps. They seem to be very popular. Fingers crossed the algorithm will pick them up. The UFC 263 is in the books, and on paper, we had a corking card on our hands. The return of Nate Diaz, Figueiredo vs Moreno, all building up to the rematch between Israel Adesanya and Marvin Vettori. Would the card deliver? Let's get to the fights. It's going to be hard trying to fit everything into 10 minutes, but here we go. Israel Adesanya continued his stranglehold on the middleweight belt, a unanimous decision win over Marvin Vettori with 50-45 on all the judges' scorecards. The big selling point of this fight was the evolution of Marvin Vettori. Had he made the progress since the first fight? What a lot of people ignored though was the progress Adesanya also made during that time. And to me, more than anything, that was the biggest standout from this fight. I'll start with the positives from Marvin. He entered the fight with a lot of confidence, and there were moments in the first two rounds where I felt he was having success. When he caught Adesanya's low kick in the first, I thought there was a chance it could play out the way that many people, including the UFC hype men, were saying it would. Wrestler versus grappler, Adesanya being kept on the ground by Vettori and just being dominated and smothered, similar to what Jan Blachowicz did. I think Marvin had built a lot of his game plan around his wrestling, and Joe Rogan made a good point on the broadcast how much bigger he was compared to when he fought Kevin Holland. But this fight also made me realise how strong Izzy is. Now, Izzy has this reputation for being a bit fragile because of his frame, but the way he was reversing position, framing himself off against the fence, he's a lot more robust than people give him credit for. I didn't realise until the weigh-ins just how muscular Adesanya was. And every time Izzy stuffed the takedowns or caught Marvin coming in, you could see Marvin's confidence lower as the shots got more desperate, the striking got wilder. He sapped a lot of confidence. Izzy mentally broke him in that fight. He mentions the rear naked choke attempt in the third round as the moment that he realised, I've got this fight won. And I can see where he's coming from. Certainly Marvin did not look like the same fighter after that moment. In a lot of ways, this fight reminded me of an old school Anderson Silva match. Like, you remember the early years of Anderson's reign, he was fighting guys like Talis Latus, Damian Maia, Patrick Courtier, and their sole objective was to just try and take him down. Yet he stuffed all the takedowns, and I'll be honest, he clowned a lot of those fighters. Now, Izzy wasn't doing the theatrics in the way Anderson was, but he made a statement with this performance. Marvin Vettori is not on my level. Now, he may have made a lot of progress as a fighter, but so have I. Now, I don't discredit Marvin for taking this fight. He was on a great winning streak, and there were some people who believed he won the first match. I personally thought Izzy won that quite comfortably, 29-28. But the feeling I got was that he got this fight out of circumstance. Izzy wanted to fight someone in June. Rob wasn't willing to turn around that quick, so Marvin fell into the fight. And there was very little about this performance from Marvin's perspective that made me change my mind. Like, don't get me wrong, Marvin Vettori is a very good fighter. We've seen this with a lot of his performance. The Jack Manson fight is up there as one of my favourites of 2020. But we saw the difference, in my opinion, between a good fighter and a great one. I also can't stress how important the fight this was for Izzy. His mystique took a big hit losing against Jan. And yes, you could write that off as a size disadvantage, but I've seen a lot of fighters take a loss which exposes a big weakness and fighters exploit it over and over. Like, the big one that comes to mind for me is Pettis. How many losses did he take after the RDA fight, which involved guys wrestling him? There was a lot of people, and I include Marvin in this, who felt once Izzy went to the ground, it was going to be game over. So to beat a wrestling-heavy fighter like Marvin, and do so in the way he did, answered a lot of skeptics. I don't think he'll ever get that over back, but to me that's a good thing. Like, anyone who watches this channel knows I'm not a big fan of double champs. I find them detrimental to the weight classes, quite gimmicky. Izzy being the top dog of middleweight, but still with enough cracks to make his fights interesting, to me is a bigger sell. And honestly, I'd love to see him versus Rob. I personally think Rob did himself no favours with his game plan in that first fight. He was very reckless. And I think the rematch could be fascinating if he approaches it in a different way. Izzy wants it in Auckland. Fingers crossed everything opens up, because that occasion would be fantastic. And I think it's something as well the UFC would be interested in. Speaking of a much improved performance in the rematch, Brandon Moreno, UFC Flyweight champion. I just want to add some backstory before I talk about the fight itself. We first became aware of Brandon around sort of 2017. He was one of the contestants on the Flyweight season of The Ultimate Fighter, where they were trying to get a contender for the Mighty Mouse. He's the last pick on the show. He still gets a UFC contract. He goes 2-2 before the UFC try and close the weight class down, and he gets cut. He fights for LFA for a little bit. They bring him back to fill the undercard of a Mexican fight night, and now he's the champion. It's a fantastic story, and the best thing about it was it wasn't a fluke. He dominated this fight. Now, I admit I picked Figueiredo to win when I did the preview show. I thought his performance against Brandon last year was more because of his quick turnaround from 255, and given the extra 7 months to prepare, he'd get the win. The moment I saw him on the scale, I switched my bet. This to me was a perfect case study for the side effects of trying to cut too much weight. Figueiredo drained himself so much to get down to 125, it affected his movement, his durability. The shot that dropped him with wasn't an especially hard strike, and Brandon's never been known as a power puncher, but Figueiredo just couldn't handle it. Moreno was getting his strikes off first, his movement was on point, he worked grappling a lot more than I thought he would. I expected him to be a little bit cautious because we know how dangerous Davidson's guillotine is. It's easy to say in hindsight, but you could argue Brandon played it a little bit safe in the first fight. And as good as that fight was, you felt he had a little left in the tank. He wanted it more on Sunday, and in my opinion, it showed. I also have to stress how big a win this is for the UFC. The UFC have wanted to crack the Mexican market for a long, long time. They played on the ancestry of Henry Cejudo, Cain Velasquez, but they've never had anyone who was born and raised and reps the Mexican flag in the same way that Brandon Moreno does. And they've tried it for a long time. Look at the way that Yair Rodriguez was always given constant fight nights, especially when they had a card in Mexico. Yair was always the guy they returned to. They tried getting behind Irene Aldana and Alexa Grasso at times. Brandon has been the first guy to crack it. This is a big moment for that country and for the UFC. And you could see with these interviews after the fights, you could see the emotion that Brandon showed when he got that belt. Personally, I think this is a real feel-good moment for the UFC. And even though flyweight isn't necessarily the biggest weight class, isn't necessarily the most popular, you've got to see that emotion from Brandon and how he reacted to it, and you can only feel happiness. In terms of Figueiredo, he's spoken about wanting to go to 135, and for me, there's no question about it now, given how depleted he was. I personally think him and Cody Garbrandt would be an amazing fight. And without cutting those extra 10 pounds, I honestly think he could thrive. Like, one loss doesn't make someone a bad fighter. Like, this is the same Davison Figueiredo that destroyed Joe Benavidez last year. And I think the weight cut and the Brandon Moreno giving the best performance of his career was his undoing. And I think the UFC were this close. It's amazing to think for me the UFC were this close to closing flyweight. Like, I love Demetrius Johnson. I think he's a fantastic fighter. But I hate to say it, the division has got so much better once he went to one championship. Because you're seeing the Brandon Morenos, the Figueiredos, Askar Askarov, who, in my opinion, is going to get the next title shot. Guys like that come into the fore. The UFC were going to get rid of all of that. And I'm so glad they didn't. Nate Diaz versus Leon Edwards, it's a funny one to judge. First off, I'll start by giving the Diaz brothers a ton of praise. For two fighters with a healthy number of losses, haven't been in title contention for God knows how long, they still managed to come out of every single fight with their stock higher than before. Let's be honest, Nate Diaz lost 24 minutes of this fight. But the 1 minute he didn't was such, he's the one leaving the arena looking like the winner. They might not look the part, but they're very savvy with their brand and they're great showmen. Nate was doing a lot in there to try and make that fight fun. It appeals to the casual fan in a way that other fighters, in my opinion, haven't really clicked onto. And it also highlights again the problem with Leon Edwards. Like, for the most part, everything Leon did in this fight was perfect. He caught Nate with some big strikes, his elbow game was on point, he bloodied Nate up. badly on the ground, landed some good judo trips, but he needs that extra something to say, hey, I'm worthy of getting this title fight over Colby. And this was supposed to be his showcase moment. This was supposed to be the time where Leon Edwards introduced himself to the world, and he never did that. Someone made this comparison. Leon is like an Oscar bait filler. You can appreciate the cinematography, the editing, the performance of the actors, but it doesn't have the X factor of something like Jurassic Park. Leon Edwards is the English patient of MMA. Now, I'd always resign myself to Leon getting passed over by Colby for the next title shot. And for me, I hate to say it, given he's unbeaten, 10 fights now? It's a given Colby's getting the next shot. And Leon's going to be stuck in this limbo until he has that star-making performance. And this should have been it. Beating Nate Diaz convincingly over 5 rounds. And instead he's coming out of this fight looking like a loser. I just feel like that can only happen to Leon Edwards. He has a lot of bad luck, but at times he doesn't help himself. For the rest of the card, big call out to Drew Dober and Brad Riddell. By a long way fight of the night. I think Riddell is starting to hit his ceiling in terms of how high up the lightweight pecking order he can get, but he nearly always brings it. Same with Drew. No shame in losing this fight. Paul Craig once again tearing up the script. Now, I admit Paul Craig's sort of an ironic favourite of mine. Everybody's striking limitations, but he's become a master at stopping these light heavyweight prospects. And now he's unbeaten in 5, and in my opinion deserves a chance against, say, the Volkans or the Nikita Krylovs of the world, those sort of like lower top 10 guys. I don't see him ever challenging for a title. His striking defense just isn't good enough. But in a division like light heavyweight, which is very striking heavy, having a guy who is grappling heavy in the way that he is, willing to pull guard, use some unconventional techniques, is a dangerous wildcard. Now, the reports seem to indicate Jamal Hill's arm isn't as bad as we feared, but the fact the ref was unaware of that was shameful. Like, I'd never heard of Al Gaini before this fight, and based on the research I've done, he holds a bit of a bad reputation in Arizona, doing some of the regional shows. I'm fairly certain he won't be back in the octagon. I did know Dana White in his post-fight press conference, he referred to him as the Arizona Mazzagatti. So thanks, Dana, for helping the algorithm on that video. We've got a massive spike in viewers after you said that, so thanks a lot. Now, I could spend much longer talking about the rest of this card, and if you are interested in what I have to think, not only about 263, but the wider sport in general, you can follow me on Twitter at @Cagefighting. I'm going to be back next Monday as we return to the UFC Apex. It's going to be a belter. It's Korean Zombie versus Dan Ige, featherweight main event. Hope you enjoyed that one. This is the INC. Thank you for watching.